Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Matthew Fox. I'm one of the trustees of the Gilbert Murray Trust and also Professor of Classics at this University, Glasgow. We held a Gilbert Murray Triennial lecture, gosh, it was 2011, I believe. We're only supposed to hold them every 9 years because the Triennial lecture rotates around 3 institutions with which Gilbert Murray had a strong association. But this is only the second time we've had it in Glasgow. It's been postponed twice because of COVID. And of course, also because of COVID, we have a collection of people watching online. I hope you can see and hear me. I won't know if you can't, but it's marvellous that we've managed to get this off the ground. Thank you all for coming, and a massive thank you to Alicia Stallings, who has come all the way from Athens. I'm not going to do a formal introduction of the talk because I'm going to hand over to the chair of the Gilbert Murray Trust, John Kittmer, who is going to do that for me. And thank you so much. I'm going to sit here and be Alicia's slide medium for the rest of the talk. Hopefully, I will get the windows so you can see how I move.
Very good. So this is the microphone for that. So I will stand here and project into the audience. Well, good evening. As Matthew said, my name is John Kittmer. I'm current chair of the Gilbert Murray Trust. It's a huge pleasure to be here in Glasgow. First, because I always like coming here, and it always rains on me, so I feel slightly damp at the moment, but that's a good feeling. I know where I am. But also because we've been trying, as Matthew said, to come here for the last 3 years. This is the 3rd year that we've tried to hold our triennial event. The last triennial we held in Oxford in 2017. We should have been here in 2020. When that was clearly not going to work, we tried 2021 and we laid slightly different plans because in 2021, there was a lot of work going on across the country to celebrate through academic talks and popular talks and films and other such things, the 200 years, the bicentenary of the Greek War of Independence. As a result of that, we were planning to celebrate not only Gilbert Murray himself, and I may say just a little word or two about him and the Trust, but also George Finlay, the great historian of the Greek War of Independence, who was also a man of Glasgow University. Both these two great Greek scholars in different fields, though both of them knew their ancient history, and the history that Finlay wrote is compendious from ancient times through to the then contemporary times. So we were planning to do a sort of double-headed celebration, as it were, but that too fell by the wayside. But what we did pick up very fortuitously through that was some sponsorship. So I must thank, before I get too far into my very brief talk, I must thank the Leventis Foundation, the A.G. Leventis Foundation, for enabling us to bring Alicia here this evening. The Trust struggles to fund this sort of activity. So it's been very, very helpful that as part of the 21 in 21 programme, which has run into the current year because of the difficulty everyone had getting their events in last year, we've had really helpful sponsorship from the A.G. Leventis Foundation. So I thank them for their grant to us, and also thank Professor Gonda van Steen and her team at the Centre for Hellenic Studies at King's College London, who are the people who actually handle the money for the whole 21 in 21 programme. So thank you for making Alicia's presence here tonight possible, and thank you for your support to the Trust. So the Trust has been in existence since 1956. It was, an endowment was put together out of money raised by public subscription, the fans and the friends of Gilbert Murray, and also from the family itself. Murray died the following year in 1957, and the Trust has been doing two things ever since then. It was set up really to reflect the rather complicated person that Gilbert Murray was. As I'm sure you all know here, he was twice professor, first here at the University of Glasgow from 89 to 98, and then the Regius Professor of Greek at Oxford from 1908 to 1936. But really in that period at Oxford, he not only worked phenomenally hard on Greek texts, and various literary books about the Greek epic and so on. But he also got very, very deeply involved in liberal politics. He was a committed liberal through his wife. He knew Asquith and the liberal establishment, and he really pushed for the League of Nations during the Great War. He thought, like many people did, that the war itself was a massive ethical failure of the British Empire and others, and he really pushed hard for the League of Nations. As a result of this, he joined the League. For many years, he was a member in Geneva of the Intellectual Cooperation Committee, and he founded the UK League of Nations Union and was its chair for very many years. So the trust set up in his honor does two things. We give grants out of the interest earned off the endowment to support the learning of ancient Greek, and we give grants to students who want to attend UN study programs. And these two things reflect the man that Murray was. So our talks, the triennial talks that we do, alternate between an international relations theme and then a Greek theme. And it was a great privilege and pleasure for me to give the 2017 talk about Greece's relations, modern relations with Turkey. Anyway, tonight we have a great treat ahead of us. I'm really pleased that Alicia has been able to join us. It's a great privilege for us that she's travelled all this way to give this talk. I've known Alicia for several years now. We met in Athens. I really got to know Alicia when the two of us were standing by the graveside of the poet Rupert Brooke on the island of Skiros on St. George's Day in 2015, the anniversary of his death. He was en route to Gallipoli at the time, died of sepsis from a mosquito bite. Anyway, we were there with the great and the good commemorating his memory. If you haven't seen his grave there, it's all on its own in an olive grove. It's well worth going to see. Spotting a kindred spirit, Alicia then worked with me on a poetry competition in Greece, where despite a lot of skepticism from my embassy, we did manage to get over 200 really very good contributions from Greek adults and also from Greek school children in English and Greek to commemorate the war. Obviously, we asked people to write about peace, but we had a really successful competition and gave a bit of a push to a number of up-and-coming poets. So I always wanted to get Alicia to come and do this, knowing that she might just say yes. And I suspected that she would probably want to talk a little, at least, about something which was part of my time in Greece. I served as ambassador from 2013 to 2016, which was the period of many crises, but one of them still continues, which is the migration crisis. Alicia, like many Greeks, Athenians, and islanders, was appalled and horrified to see what was going on, and has engaged practically to help the refugees. The problems very much persist. So I asked Alicia, hoping that she would throw something together, which picked up her great interests in poetry. Alicia, as you know, is a poet, a critic, a translator of Lucretius, of Hesiod, recently of the mock Homeric epic, the battle between the frogs and the mice, but also, of course, a first-rate poet in her own right. Her recent collection, Like, was finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Alicia is a lyre with many strings. So it's a huge pleasure to have her here tonight. I know she's going to weave a very rich tapestry for us. Thank you so much to Alicia for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first ever visit to Glasgow. Thank you to the trustees of the Gilbert Murray Trust for the invitation, and to Glasgow University for having me here and hosting this, and to the Leventis Foundation. It was, of course, a real treat in Athens for the poets of Athens to have someone who is so engaged in poetry, Greek poetry, but I think just generally in poetry as the ambassador from the UK to Greece. It was a special time. So I'm coming here tonight. I'm going to be speaking. I hope it is a rich tapestry. I hope I don't get tangled up in my many strings. I will take for the text of my sermon, as it were, for this evening, two verses from George Chapman's 1611 translation of the Iliad, the one that inspired Keats's famous sonnet. And those two lines are, "Thus spake she weeping, and with her did the other ladies moan, Patroclus' fortunes in pretext, but in sad truth their own." This comes from book 19 of the Iliad, so the poem is already heading towards its conclusion. It's 2/3 over, or more so. And these lines occur after a minor character, Briseis, hitherto nothing more than a plot point from the opening of the poem, suddenly comes into her own in what I can only describe as an aria. It's a lament for the death of Patroclus, Achilles' companion and her protector, and what this loss spells for her own fortune. We will remember that the Iliad starts with a plague, and that in ancient Greek literature, a plague implies a crisis of leadership. A Trojan-affiliated priest of Apollo has called this plague down on the Greek armies because his daughter has been seized along with a number of other women from various towns to become essentially a comfort woman, a sex slave, and is being used particularly by Agamemnon, the head honcho of the whole shebang. This priest of Apollo would like his daughter back, and if they will not give her back, Apollo is going to rain this plague down upon them, which he does. So it's up to Agamemnon to give up this girl, Chryseis. He is reluctant to do this, so the plague continues for a bit. Finally, he's convinced to do it, and he says, fine, I will give up this girl, but I'm going to take someone else's girl. You, Achilles, I'm going to take your girl, Briseis, who is again part of the booty, part of the loot of raided cities that Achilles has himself raided. And it is from this that we have the quarrel of Achilles, and this is what Achilles is angry about, his plights and his gripes, as John Berryman might say. Book one gives us two more pieces of information about Briseis and about these raids, perhaps. Achilles complains to his mother, who, as we remember, happens to be a goddess of the sea. And it's a wonderful little speech itself. She comes out of the sea and she says, oh, my boy, what is wrong? Why are you weeping? And he says, you already know what this is about. And we have this wonderful excuse for an exposition. You already know the whole story. But the thing is, perhaps we, as the readers or the audience, do not know. I'll tell you the whole story. We went to Thebe, the sacred city of Eetion. We burnt it to the ground. We took everything. We took booty. We took slaves. For the son of Atreus, Agamemnon, they chose Chryseis, whose cheeks are beautiful. As for the other girl, Briseis, the heralds have taken her from my tent, she whom the sons of the Achaeans gave to me. There's another small piece of information in book one, which is as she's being led away from the tents of Achilles and his camp, she leaves unwillingly, aekusa, which I think is a very potent little word there. I think we don't normally think about whether slaves are willing or unwilling. That's an interesting part on the composer of the Odyssey, whom I will call Homer, and I will use they, them, their pronouns, but I might use them in the singular. So we have this information that she is unwilling, and I think our assumption is maybe that she loves Achilles. We'll find out more about that. We get little bits of information sort of come out throughout the entire Iliad about these raids where these women are taken. There's a bit in the catalog of ships in book two, which is mostly, of course, about all of the people who have come to Troy on their various ships. We do get Achilles and his Myrmidons, even though they're not doing anything at this point in the war, for there was no one to lead them into the ranks. Shining Achilles, the fast runner, lay among the ships, angry because of Briseis, whose hair is lovely. He had captured her in Lyrnessos at great effort, when he savaged Lyrnessos and the walls of Thebe, and he overthrew Mines and Epistrophus, who raged with the spear, the sons of King Evenus, Seleucus's son. Achilles grieved for her now and would not fight, though fated to do so before long. So we have this wonderful foreshadowing. He will get back into the fight. And we learn about a different raid. There's the raid of Thebe. Now we know that there's also a raid of Lyrnessos, wherever these places are. We then have another image in book 6, which is when Hector goes back to Troy. He visits his mother, he visits the people of Troy, and he visits his wife Andromache in what is also, I think, of kind of as an aria. So Andromache, she says to him, you know, nothing can happen to you because you are the only family I have left. I have no father and no revered mother. My father, Achilles, killed when he sacked the city of the Cilicians, high-gated Thebe. Oh, well, that's interesting. Andromache is the daughter of Eetion. He killed Eetion, but he did not despoil him, for in his heart he respected him. He burned this king in his fancy armor, and he heaped up a tomb. How he should treat a royal enemy in battle, not. We know what will happen to Hector. We find out that I had 7 brothers in my hall who went into the house of Hades all in a single day. Achilles, the fast runner, killed them all as they tended their lumbering cattle and white-fleeced sheep. As for my mother, who was queen in wooded Placos, they brought her here with the other possessions, here meaning to the area of Troy. So not only has Achilles killed her father in one of his raids, he has enslaved her mother, who is then ransomed, but then her mother dies, presumably of grief, even after having been ransomed back. I should say that most of the translations, I'm using Powell's through most of these. So one of the things about living in Greece during these times of crisis, and basically since I've lived in Greece, there's been one crisis after another, is that it has made reading ancient literature set in Greece very different. I pay maybe a little more attention to geography, to place names that I think, you know, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Georgia, I think, you know, I just thought, oh, there's a town that starts with an E, there's a town that starts with a T. I didn't really think about it. But I started to think about these things around 2015, particularly. Book 9, and we might at this time look at one of maybe the first map, if we can switch the slides. Okay. Or maybe we'll start here. We start to get more information again in book 9. Again, you'll see that this information is kind of paced out very well throughout the entire Iliad and kind of comes out at moments of intensity. So in book 9, Agamemnon is sick of Achilles not doing anything, and he sends his embassy with Odysseus to go persuade Achilles to come back into the fight. So they're going to go and they're going to offer him all kinds of presents, including Briseis, which is what the fight was about in the first place. They arrive at Achilles and his tents. And Achilles, if you remember, is kind of off alone in a very singular scene in all of Homer, where someone is just singing to themselves, particularly in the Iliad. This is very strange. And he's strumming on a beautiful lyre. It's a lyre fit for a king. It has part of it is pure silver, the bridge perhaps. And he is singing to himself. What is he singing? He is singing about the brave deeds of men, or if we remember Berryman again, Achilles who loves people and valiant art. The lyre, it turns out, has been seized on the raid to Eetion's palace in Thebe. That is Andromache's father. This perhaps maybe even belonged to the king. Achilles is playing on some of the booty from these raids, where we find out he has raided 12 cities by sea, 11 by land, 23 in all. Troy will be the 24th. And I think we know exactly what he's playing on this lyre. He's singing about the brave deeds of men? Is he not singing about these raids? Is he not singing about what Walter Leaf calls the great foray? It's the poem before the poem, the Iliad before the Iliad. As Walter Leaf says, I think this is around 1911, the story of a raid by Achilles along, he defines it as this, the story of a raid by Achilles along the southern Troad to the very head of the Gulf of Adramyttium. This is the Gulf of Adramyttium. Now it is called Edremit in Turkey. And this island here is Lesbos, or Lesbos, but I'm going to call it Lesbos. This raid took place in the middle of summer, for we shall find the cattle already driven up to the heights of Ida, to the fresh grass on the treeless upper slopes. Andromache's brothers are pasturing their cattle somewhere up in these hills. Later, there's Aeneas gets sort of attacked during these same raids up in these hills, but he ends up in one of these other cities. A plundering expedition, of course, sets to Troy is further up the coast, and Smyrna is further down. I don't have a map that gives that. So Achilles, a plundering expedition, of course, sets to work at the farthest point in order to save needless transport of bulky and troublesome cargo, and I'm quoting Walter Leaf here, consisting largely of women and other live animals. Achilles, therefore, is starting from Troy, rows and sails the 70 miles. He probably goes further up there. It's probably Phoebe, let us say, is somewhere around Havran. Forgive my mispronunciation of the Turkish. So this embassy to Achilles offers him not only Briseis, they offer him tripods, they offer him a dozen horses, they offer him 10 talents of gold. Agamemnon offers him one of his own daughters in marriage. But among the things that are offered are some other booty from this raid, 7 women from Lesbos, 7 women who are wonderful at weaving and are beautiful among women. And somehow Briseis is associated with them, even though she is taken at Lernasos. Let's say that's around Burhaniye. But remember, these women who are taken, Andromache's mother, Chryseis and Briseis, they are married women. These are not virgins. These are married women whose husbands have been slain, and then they are taken into slavery. So it's possible that Briseis originally hails from Lesbos and is somehow among or associated with these 7 women. But does Achilles take this and go back into the battle? No, because then the poem would be much, much, much shorter. So he turns it down because he is still insulted. So again, rereading the Iliad around 2015, Carolyn Alexander's translation had come out. I think I was supposed to review it. So I was looking at the translation and looking back at the Greek of the poem. Things that would leap out at me being in Greece in 2015 and 2016, the word Lesbos, and suddenly realizing, wow, there's been activity going around here for a long time. There's been war and the aftermath of war. And then Achilles, still in his great sulk, he protests that he's been ill-used. He has been insulted. He has been treated like an atimiton metanastin. If you know ancient Greek, metanastin means a migrant, but guess what? Modern Greek metanasti is a migrant. It is the exact word that is in the newspapers. And it was interesting to look at the translations because it was often not translated as a migrant. Sometimes it's a stranger or a traveler. But to me, what that looks like, atimiton metanastin, is a no-count migrant. You're treating me like somebody who has no rights in this place. Again, this is a word that leapt out at me in 2015, especially in combination with Lesbos. 2015, in October of 2015, as John will remember, was the peak of arrivals, often from Syria and from the civil war there, but also from Afghanistan. In the month of October 2015, the arrivals in Lesbos alone, in this island alone, were over 200,000. The peak day was the 20th of October in 2015, when 10,000 people arrived in Lesbos on a single day. All right, so let's skip back to the beginning, which is in book 19. Again, a lot of water has passed under the bridge. And Patroclus has been killed. Achilles is upset, and now he will go back into the battle. But he thinks, I will also go ahead and get my prizes for coming back into battle that Agamemnon promised me. So we go ahead and get the prizes. We get the tripods and the horses and the gold talents. We get Briseis. We get the 7 women of Lesbos who are skilled in weaving and are also beautiful. And it's at this point that Briseis comes back into the story. So she has been missing all of this time in Agamemnon's camp, and she comes back into Achilles' camp only to discover there is Patroclus dead. And this is when she comes out with what I would describe as an aria. And this is sort of my translation, because what I've done, it's not supposed to be a very poetic translation, but I'm kind of trying to hew to the syntax of the Greek, because to me, the syntax here is broken and upset, and it's someone who is upset and giving you the information as it's flooding into their own brain. So this is Briseis. Oh, Patroclus, you who were to me, my wretched heart, the dearest, alive, I left you when I went away from the hut. Now dead, I find you, you a leader of the people. I, back again returned. Oh, for me, evil follows on evil always. My husband, to whom my father and my lady mother gave me, I saw before the city, gashed with sharp bronze, and my own 3 brothers, whom my mother bore, dead. They all met the day of their ruin, but never, no, never, did you use to let me, when swift Achilles slew my husband and laid waste the city of godlike Menes, to let me weep. But you tell me you would make me the wedded bedmate of godlike Achilles, that he would take me away in his ships to Phthia and throw a wedding feast before the Myrmidons. So for you, unceasingly I weep, you, kind, always. This is more or less the order of the Greek. What's interesting also in this is that always, which comes twice at the end of lines here. So it's in the position in the line is where we have 2 long vowels, or 2 long syllables rather, and always is all vowels. It's alpha, iota, epsilon, iota. It's 2 diphthongs. So if you think about what that sounds like at the end of the line, and I'm terrible about pronouncing ancient Greek because I now completely mix it up with my modern Greek, so you'll have to forgive me. But to me, this sounds almost like a howl at the end of the line. Ai. I mean, imagine someone performing this and uttering these vowels. If you think about it, I suspect, like in a Scottish ballad, if you have for forever, A-Y-E, that must be cognate in some way, but I could be wrong. I didn't look that up. And it is at this point where we have these strange 2 lines, which I will read in the Chapman translation. Thus spake she weeping, and with her did the other ladies moan Patroclus' fortunes in pretext, but in sad truth, their own. One of the things to consider is we know who these women are. These are the 7 women from Lesbos who have also just been returned with Briseis, who have all been perhaps together in the camp in Agamemnon. So we know a little bit about these backup singers for the famous solo. Perhaps in happier times, rather, they would have been the 7 brides to Andromache's 7 doomed brothers. But we are in a world well described by W.H. Auden in his Shield of Achilles, where women are raped, where 2 boys knife a 3rd. These 7 women who have been seized and taken over the sea on ships to a life of misery and servitude, women who are lovely and useful and skilled at the loom. I am particularly struck by Chapman's apt pretext for prophasin, which you might translate on the face of it. We'll look at a couple of other ways people have translated this. Barry Powell has the very accurate, and I think this works very well. So Briseis spoke, wailing, and the women too mourned ostensibly for Patroclus, but each one really bemoaned her own sorrows. Lattimore kind of stretching the syntax a little bit, but closer to the Greek syntax maybe. So she spoke lamenting, and the women sorrowed around her, grieving openly for Patroclus, but for her own sorrows each. Not sure that's English, but anyway, it works in a poetic way. Fitzgerald has, she wailed again, and women sobbed about her, first for Patroclus, then for each one's grief. Some of you may have read Pat Barker's Silence of the Girls, which is basically a novelization of the experience of Briseis and some of these women. And I was reading through it to see what she does with these lines, because for me, these lines are very, very important. And I see that she essentially translates them. This is Briseis. I wept without restraint, and the other women, hearing my cries, came running out of the huts to mourn with me. I think we were all, to some extent, using Patroclus' death as a cover to mourn our own losses. The word pretext, if we think about it, I think works exactly well for what is happening here. It means to weave before, or to embroider, to fringe, to embroider over. So I think it is especially apt for these women who are themselves weavers. And perhaps we might think in the future that they will be expressing their sorrows in some of the beautiful work that they do on the loom. I think what we have here is the germ of tragedy itself. That is to say, a speaker and a lamenting chorus. And I find these lines among the most moving and important in the Iliad. I think they say something profound about suffering. They say something about war and migration. And they are lines that I often think of in the context of a poetry workshop I run in Athens with migrant women at Melissa, which is a network for migrant women, many of them who are fleeing war, almost all of whom have come across this stretch of water. And have suffered losses of a similar scale. When one woman breaks down in tears, everybody weeps. But we weep in sympathy, but everyone is also weeping for their own private sorrows. Let me start over. This is a quotation from an autobiographical novel of an Asia Minor refugee. When the waves of the Aegean parted and the mountains of Lesbos began to emerge from the depths, damp, shining, and serene, the waves were astonished to see the island, their new friend. They were used to traveling from the regions around the Sea of Crete and breaking on the shores of Anatolia. All they knew of dry land were hard mountains, gigantic cliffs, and yellow rocky land. But this new island was something different. How very different it was. And that's why the waves said, let's take the news to the nearest land, to the land of Aeolia. Let's tell it about the island, the new land that married light with serenity. The waves came and brought the sea's news to the Aeolian shore. The Aeolian shore is right there. Other waves came, and still others, all the waves. They told of the play of the island's lines, the play of harmony and silence. Let's pay attention to waves, which is one of the metaphors we will hear over and over and over again about migration. The first day that the hard mountains of Anatolia heard the waves, they remained aloof. They heard them the next day and still did not react. But then when it became too much, when every second they heard nothing but the roar of the sea telling them about the miracle, the mountains gave up their indifference, curious. They leaned over above the waves to see the Aegean island. They were envious of its harmony and said, let us too make a place of serenity in the land of Aeolia that will be just like the island. Then the mountains moved aside and drew back further inland. The place they left became the place of serenity, and the mountains of Anatolia are called the Cimindinia. These are the mountains back here. But further up there would be Mount Ida, and these are the foothills of Mount Ida up there. So this is from the book The Land of Aeolia by Ilias Venezis. That's his pen name. His actual name is Elias Melos. This is the translation, wonderful translation by Therese Sellers. He was born in Ayvalık in 1904 and died in Athens in 1973. The book was written in Athens during the German occupation of Greece. And the Asia Minor refugee who wrote it, Ilias Venezis, almost didn't live to see the book's publication. He was under an order of execution by the Nazis in Athens because he had been caught in a secret meeting at the Bank of Greece where they were observing a memorial for the death of someone that they knew who had died on the fighting Italian fascists in Albania. So he was not going to see this novel reach publication, but due to the intervention of many people, including Archbishop Damascenus, at the last minute, he received a stay of execution, and so he got to see the publication of the book in 1943, and it has never been out of print. One of the really strange things about this book is it's full of sort of magical realism. In the land of Iolia, eels and trees and even drops of blood are sentient and part of a living whole, even as the book has a lot of psychological realism and is the story of a childhood disrupted by a bloody history and the whole Christian population evicted under persecution and later evicted forever. But when it was first published in English translation in 1949, the publisher or the translator perhaps took out everything that was magical realism or strange. So that whole first passage, which describes the birth of the island of Lesbos, is gone. Anything about talking animals is gone. Therese Sellers posits that it seems whoever decided to eliminate these passages from the first translation did not or could not believe that readers of English would tolerate such nonsense. One wonders what such translators or publishers would do with the Iliad if it should have suddenly come into their hands. There are gods, and there are golden fembots, and magic tripods, and talking horses. The book ends with the family having to leave the mainland, or they're going to face death. It doesn't say exactly where they will end up, but as it is autobiographical, we may assume it is Lesbos, which was where Venezis lived during World War I. The family briefly returned to Anatolia when Greece regained control, and then had to leave permanently after the Asia Minor catastrophe in 1922, and were living on Lesbos. In the meantime, Ilias was among the Greek men taken for slave labor by the Turks into the interior, and out of his battalion of 3,000, only 23 survived, and one of them is him. So we may assume that this book begins and ends among the islands of the Eastern Aegean, but there's a very strange couple of chapters in the very middle of the book. I think these were also taken out in the first translation, and they are set on another island where the waves are a storm coming from the frozen north. This chapter begins, winter of 1850, night, in Scotland, in the region of Loch Lomond. The storm comes in waves from the frozen North Sea and tears over the trees and the land. And yet one single light has not gone out tonight in the country of Loch Lomond. Sir Arthur Castabel is staying up alone in his library in his ancient tower. So suddenly we're transported to Scotland. Sir Arthur has a nephew, Robert, who's about aged 16, and they are reading ancient Greek together. As they are working through what we see is Aeschylus' suppliant woman, the Iechitides, which we might translate as the female asylum seekers. There's a very strange, again, magical realism moment that happens. While the storm howled outside and the waves raged on the ocean, while trees fell, struck by thunderbolts, the serenity that comes from the Aegean's ancient days entered the wind-beaten Scottish tower and filled it with light and poetry. And here we get lines 112 through 120, a chorus of the suppliant women by Aeschylus. One of the interesting things looking at it in Greek, as opposed to in English translation, in Therese Sellers' translation of the book, she translates this chorus into, very good English verse. But one of the choices, if you're writing in Greek, is not to translate it. You don't change font. There's just suddenly ancient Greek next to modern Greek. And that is what he chooses to do. He does not translate it. There's a footnote there that says what lines of Aeschylus it is. It's a very interesting choice because this is an interesting author and an interesting play in modern Greek not to translate. If it were, say, Euripides, there could be passages of Euripides that are more or less intelligible in modern Greek, but Aeschylus is largely not. And, it's very strange language, even for ancient Greek. And that he picks this play, which at the time of this book's publication was not a very popular play. It is now a popular play because it is about migration and about asylum seekers and about otherness and all of these things that are very much happening in the news. So it's an interesting and curious choice. What happens next in the novel is part of this magical realism. So you have this chorus. I'll give you Gilbert Murray's version of this chorus, which is very musical. As I speak, there comes a crying from within that checks my breath. 'Tis a music full of tears for some terror that it hears as a dirge over the dying. For this life I count as death. Be ours, O bosomed earth, earth o'er the sea. No tongue of thine own birth is strange to thee. Thou hearest us, earth, our friend. Or where words fail, I beat my breast and rend this Tyrian veil. In Herbert Weir Smith's more prosaic version, such piteous strains of woe I utter in my pain, now shrill, now deep, blended with falling tears. Alas, alas, again, pure vowels in the Greek, groans appropriate to funeral wails, though I live, I chant my own dirge. I invoke Apia's hilly land, for well, O land, you understand my barbarous speech, and many times I lay my hands upon my Sidonian veil and tear its linen fabric to shreds. Sidonian is basically from Lebanon. But these women are coming from Egypt. One of the things that we know about them in Aeschylus is that these 50 women, who are the daughters of Danaus, to the Greeks, who they are coming to asking for asylum, they look strange, their clothes look strange. Even though Greek women did wear veils, there's something about the way these women are veiled that is exotic and strange. Their complexions are dark, and there's something about their voice is strange, or their speech is strange. One of the nice things about the Greek too is you understand, the earth understands our barbarous language. In the Greek, it's konis, which I think must be, again, cognate with ken. The earth kens their language. What happens after this chorus in the novel is very strange. The chorus of asylum seekers materializes in the room in Scotland. It's a very ghostly happening. This is a quotation. And from this piece, the piece of the poetry, came shadows that began to stir in the half-dark room. They were women. They were young women dressed in yellow chitons that came down to their feet. Their loose black hair fell over their bodies, while the desert walked slowly behind them, close and unperturbed. They were suppliants pleading, but in their faces, the agony of supplication passed through the distance of time, and the space of poetry lost its rending power and became inspiration, became only light. And the waves of the Greek archipelago were moved. They walked beside the desert of Egypt, then they passed over the desert of Egypt, and everything turned blue. Very bizarre, and very poetic. We might think, though, about this. The book itself is written in very clear, straightforward modern Greek. There are some unusual words in Venetius's book, Turkish words, for instance, that are simply transliterated into Greek. Obscure words like for male camels, which I didn't know, which are footnoted in my Greek copy. But the only footnote here is, again, for the line numbers. So it's a kind of curious choice. A little bit after this, as the uncle and the nephew are talking in this tower in Scotland, the nephew is talking, is this magical place, Greece, is it real or is it a fairy tale? And the uncle says that it is a real place. And this is how the Scottish uncle explains Greece to his Scottish nephew. Lord Byron went there to die. He said that for an Englishman to be able to leave his island and go to another country to die only in order to die, this magic must be alive. So it's this kind of strange, very Greek view of things. But one of the things I think that we do have to consider is that for Venezis, who becomes an Asia Minor refugee in 1922 and 1923, you have 1 million Greek Christians who come to Greece from Asia Minor as ethnic Turks go to Turkey in what is euphemistically called a population exchange. But they weren't universally welcomed. They were thought of as strange. They wore outlandish dress. They had a sort of strange flavor to their Greek. They had strange spices in their food. They had strange Ionic strains, let us say, to their music that sounded Eastern and dark and strange. And these become, once they get to mainland Greece, become the Rebetica and the Greek blues. And they're also the songs that are known as the Amanades, the songs of Aman, the songs of Alas, which I think is exactly what the Ionic strains are doing kind of in Aeschylus. One of the things that Gilbert Murray thought about the Suppliant Women of Aeschylus, he thought that this was Aeschylus's oldest play. I think now we think that that oldest extant play is the Persians, because he thought it was the most primitive and perhaps, in the common opinion of scholars, the most stiff, helpless, and unintelligible, because it's a strange play where you have a chorus of 50 women who are also somehow the protagonist, and this seemed to him a very kind of ancient ritualistic form of tragedy. And it is now, though, one of the more popular plays to talk about because it is speaking about migration, about foreignness, about asylum. It's the 50 daughters of Danaus fleeing a forced marriage with their cousins. They have crossed the Mediterranean from Egypt near the gardens of Syria to seek asylum in Greece from the king of Argos. And the play makes it very clear that these women seem very other and strange. And the king of Argos even says in this, totally kind of politically incorrect way, looking at these strangely dressed maidens, you look like nomads, you look like people who, ride on camels and live in tents. So Murray thought that Aeschylus basically invented tragedy and the tragic sense, but I think here he kind of invents a certain Orientalism. Camel drivers and caravans are actually a common feature in Aeolian lands and would not have, it's firsthand experience, for instance, for Venezis. Venezis is among the first Asia Minor refugees to receive any kind of reputation in modern Greek. In the mid-1960s, he built a house on Lesbos with a view to the mountains, but he would never actually return to Asia Minor and eventually died in Athens. We talk about this as Aeolian, this might be Ionian. There's a little bit of fudging of the two. I'm meaning Anatolia by both of these things. And with the Ionic strain, which the Suppliant Women are singing, with the meter that they are singing, this is always kind of used for barbarians and for people who sing. Edith Hall, in her Inventing the Barbarians, also talks about the contrast between singing and speaking voices. The barbarians always sing. So this is something to think about. And they're often doing it in this Ionic ba-ba, ba-ba, kind of two shorts, long, long kind of meter on the bald street breaks the blank day. It was the Ionic meter was known also as the Persian meter because it's again associated with the exotic and the East. One of the things that's kind of interesting then is from the East, the Greeks become known as Ionians, which is why when you talk to Syrians and so forth, they talk about Yunan. Yunan is Ionian. Yeah, so this kind of word passes in again to what is happening now in the current day. Angelos Sikelianos, who was the poet Greek poet who's first nominated for the Nobel Prize, also wrote a preface for this novel. And he says in it, Ionia is not gone. Ionia lives on, her lost age-old civilization exists. The terrible drama of history has brought it to us. The refugees have brought it to us. Let me start one last time, and I will finish on this one. We will fast forward from the Bronze Age, from 1914 and 1922 to the days of 2015 and 2016. I am volunteering at the Port of Piraeus and at Melissa Network of Migrant Women, where I run a poetry workshop. I'm also volunteering at an irregular shelter, which we referred to as a squat. At the same time, I am the mother of young school-age children. As a volunteer on Facebook, I receive lots of lists. Among the things a lot of people were doing was going down to the port of Piraeus as people were pouring into the port of Piraeus, and we communicated via Facebook, and you would find out what ships are coming in, what time, how many people are on it, what do people need. But again, as a poet, there's always a narrative for me when it comes to lists, which are some of the elements of poetry. You think of the catalog of ships. I have some of these notations from this catalog of ships in 2016. 4th of January, 2016, arrivals in Piraeus. The Mykonos from Chios and Samos with 688 refugees. The Ariadne from Lesbos and Chios with 1,880 refugees. 18th of February, I note that this is the closure of the Balkan route. Refugees can no longer walk out of the country. Populations start to build up at Piraeus and elsewhere. 6:15, the Blue Star 1 is at gate E2. 9:40, the Diagoras is at gate E1. 11:35, the Nisos Mykonos is at E7, many refugees arrival expected. 20th of February, 2016, the Ariadne arrives tonight at 10 p.m. at E1 with 1,900 refugees on board. 22 February, 2016, the Blue Star Patmos arrives in E1 at 7 o'clock today with 1,277 refugees aboard. February 25th, 26th. Among these, I've interspersed notations of some of the really bad shipwrecks and the drownings, because this also was affecting me. I think there's the very famous photograph of the young child on the sand, but I was seeing many, many, many photographs, not just that famous one. January 22nd, 42 drowned, 17 children off of Pharmakonisi and another shipwreck. And I learned that just as I had dropped my children off to school, and I thought, that's a classroom full of children. February 8th, 35 people drowned, 24 have come from Edgermont, and 11 in another separate accident. 19th of February, the UNHCR announces that on average, this is 19th of February, 2016, on average, 2 children have died drowning every day since September of 2015. That was in 2016. I don't know what it is now. I have this note for the 20th of March in 2016. Today, everything changes and something cracks, because this is the beginning of the day of the EU-Turkey agreement. From this day, the tent city at Piraeus will grow from scores to 5,000 within weeks. Seeds of despair are sown in the muddy fields to the north at the border town of Idomeni. We might actually click through a couple of the slides. If this is again, we see Lernosis, and if we go back to the pot, maybe I'll just show the, these are the weaving women. We can keep going. This is a drawing from a child. You see a dinghy, people in life jackets. We can go back to that maybe later. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Oh, sorry. Because we can get actually to, if we keep. This is a picture that my husband took. He's a journalist in 2016 of just the masses of life jackets that are just on the beach. I'm sure you've seen many of these images. We can keep going. This is, again, this is in Piraeus. This is above it is a big mural, which is showing the celebrations. We're getting ready for the 2,500th anniversary of Salamis against the Persians. Below you have Persian speakers in tents. This is before it really became a big tent city. On this day, the 20th of March, 2016, the Greek president, Prokopis Pavlopoulos, sends out a press release for the joint observation of International Poetry Day and Fight Against Racism Day, quoting Thucydides and ending with 10 lines of Sepharis's last stop here in the Keeley Sherrod translation. We come from Arabia, Egypt, Palestine, Syria. The little state of Commagene, which flickered out like a lamp, often comes to mind, and great cities that lived for thousands of years, think of Troy, and then became pasture land for cattle. Fields for sugarcane and corn became from the sand of the desert, from the seas of Proteus, souls shriveled by public sins, each holding office like a bird in its cage. The president bolded those last 2 lines for emphasis, and as a whole, the poem bears rereading. It's eerily topical. The same thing over and over again, you'll tell me, friends, but the thinking of a refugee, the thinking of a prisoner, the thinking of a person when he too has become a commodity, try to change it. You can't. The poem begins and ends in the first person. Liges inictis me fengari pumaresan. Few are the nights with a moon that appeal to me, but in the middle, it breaks into that choral we. In the poetry workshop at the Millicent Network, what I try to focus on is being able to speak in the first person, because one of the things that we do when refugees seek asylum is we turn them into a group, we turn them into a chorus. The official things that you have to the hoops that you have to jump through to be a refugee. You must be outside the country you're from. You must be unable or unwilling to return to the country you're from because you have a well-founded fear. You must be afraid. There must be objective evidence from your country that there is a threat to your life, freedom, or other human rights. That if you return to your country, you'll be persecuted based on more of the following reasons: your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or your membership of a particular social group, family, or persons with similar backgrounds, habits, or social status, often with a characteristic which is innate, unchangeable, or fundamental. So we are asking people to speak as part of a group, and they have to kind of follow a certain narrative. We might remember in Aeschylus's Suppliant Women that Danaus gives some advice to the 50 daughters of how they should ask for asylum. He essentially coaches them for their asylum interview. Reply to the strangers, as is fitting for aliens, in piteous and plaintive language of necessity, telling them clearly of your flight, how it was unstained by deed of blood. Above all, let no arrogance accompany your speech, and reveal nothing impious in your peaceful eyes from your respectful face. In your speech, neither interrupt nor hesitate, for this would offend these people. And remember to be submissive. You are an alien, a fugitive, and in need. Bold speech does not suit the weak. And this is kind of what we ask now, what we demand. So in the poetry workshop, one of the things that we do is we try to speak in the first person if we want to. Sometimes we do have group projects. It doesn't have to be about fear or about trauma. We can talk about love. We can talk about joy. We can talk about humor. But I'm dealing with women who speak various languages. Even among our Persian speakers, we have Persian speakers from Iran, and we have Dari speakers from Afghanistan. We have interpreters, and people also write in their own languages. Sometimes they're using their phone as a translation tool. But one of the ways that I would start is with lists, because again, lists are essential to poetry. We think about the catalog of ships. We think about the dead women, the beautiful dead women in the Odyssey. And one of the first things we did was lists of home. What makes home? So at first it was just what's necessary. People would say shower, bathroom, rest, television. But I said, no, what makes a home to you? Then people said music, books, flowers. My favorite was bird seed, parentheses, for the bird. Let's assume that home has a bird, and then let's get bird seed for that bird. Goldfish, kisses, school. Another early exercise we did was having people use the letters of their name and make an acrostic. Again, centering on the individual rather than the group. But the words that came out often did speak in that choral we. A might be alone, it might be Athens, it might be Afghanistan, it might be asylum. Asylum, remember, has that privative that which cannot be seized. F, freedom. G was often Greece. I might be Iran or Iraq, but so often it was island. M, migrant, mother, map. R was refugee. S was the sea. W might be wonderful, but more often it was war. One of the most popular things that I do is we do ekphrastic poems based on art. I bring in a big stack of postcards of famous paintings or not so famous paintings and pass them around. And if something speaks to someone, they write about that. They could be memories, it could be anything they want to write about. By far the most popular is Hokusai's print of the Great Wave. And I think these women helped me see that print in a way I hadn't seen it before. I had never really noticed the boats. I don't know why. I noticed the beautiful wave, but it's terrifying. There's these tiny little wooden boats. And all of these women who had made this terrible crossing, what they saw was the people in the boats. Mujabi writes, I see the refugee life in this picture. When they decide to travel, they don't know about the dangerous ways and the other things coming after this event. They drowned in this sea. Another woman, reacting to the same image, says, the first time I saw this boat, I was afraid. I thought I would die with this unsafe boat because it was the first time I saw this kind of transportation and that kind of sea. Sakina, an Afghan teenager who came over as an unaccompanied minor and is a Hazara as well, so like Tripoli persecuted, filled a notebook page with blue ink, waves and waves of blue ink, including the following sentences and phrases: fear, terror, anxiety, death, but hope. Remember, your goal wasn't to shipwreck and die. You came to make your future. Fatima, I think about this painting, that the sea is very stormy and wavy, that all the boats I see, they're going to capsize. That was one of the words they really wanted to learn. What's the word for when the boat turns over? And Paveen, does this ship take me to where my thoughts are? I am alone. I have no patience because I don't know if the waves will carry me to shore. For most of the women, I titled the poem on the whiteboard after Hukasai's print, The Great Wave, but Sakina titled her own poem. She called it The Sea of Hope. Current events rarely so closely map onto prepared remarks, but many of you will know, or maybe not, that last night in gale force winds, 2 ships foundered in Greek waters. One, a rubber dinghy carrying 40 people, set off from Isomat near Ivy, exactly where Venetius was born. It sank east of Lesbos in the Provoskida area. There were 40 people on that boat. So far, 17 bodies have been recovered, 16 of them women from Africa, a 17th body has been recovered, which is a young man and possibly a minor. And a second wooden vessel carrying about 100 people off of Kythera, and that's still an ongoing process. I don't know how many people have drowned in that. It's all still happening. So I think that's one of the things of how this has changed. How I'm a classicist, I think, is realizing, first of all, I would say the continuity of Greek. I think of Greek as a continuum, and the continuity of history and geography. I know not all classicists are on the continuum bandwagon, but I am definitely on that bandwagon. And if I have time, I'd like to close on a poem, if I may. So this, I think, is both an individual and a choral poem. Again, in those days of 2016, when there was so much going on with volunteers and the Port of Piraeus and so forth, and we would get these lists. The lists often to me became narratives, became kind of a music in and of themselves. I don't normally do this, but in this case, I have a found poem. I've taken this more or less verbatim from Appendix A, useful phrases in Arabic, Farsi, Dari, and Greek, from the Guide to Volunteering in Athens as updating for March 17th, 2016. I've made only a very few changes, which are mostly just in the organization. Welcome to Greece. Thank God for your safe arrival, greeting after trip. Hello, good morning, good evening, good night. Thank you, you're welcome. Please, I don't understand. I don't speak Arabic, Farsi. Slowly, come here. You're safe. Are you wet? Cold? Yes? No? My name is, what is your name? He, she, it is, we, they are. God is with the patient, will make people laugh. Give yourself a break. Comforting words, free, no charge. Refugee, volunteer, foreigner, friend. I am hungry, thirsty, food, water. Does it hurt? Sick, pregnant, mother, father, brother, sister, child, family. What country is your family from? Pharmacy, medicine, hospital, doctor, tent. Sorry, it has run out. We do not have it now. New shoes only if yours are broken. Wait here, please. I will return soon. Follow me, come with me, come back in 5, 15, 45 minutes, 1 hour, quarter, half hour, half day, today, tomorrow, yesterday. How many people? Sorry. Stay calm. 1 line, please. Next person.
Actually speak now. Don't want to do this.
Thank you, Lucia. That was more than a tapestry. It was incredibly personal and moving. I think we're all unable really to speak. Thank you so much for talking. Do you want to do questions and answers, or would you rather mingle outside?
I also have 2 short performances of the Briseis thing in Greek, and also of the chorus of the Suppliant Women by Bettina Joy de Guzman, who's done this especially for us for this evening. They're short. I should also say the photograph from earlier from the Port of Piraeus is by Adrian Kofopoulou, another poet who is working in the volunteers. So this is Briseis and the Women. This is done particularly for this evening, if we can hear it. And I hope you can hear that.
It's 287.
Last month. We've also got a very brief of the chorus of the substance, which is much shorter, where, and I sort of emphasize, we want it to sound ionic and Eastern and spooky. I think it's the other one, not, oh yeah, that one.
Great. Well, we've decided.
Any room in under two.
We've decided that we've got wine outside, so Alicia is going to be with us. So please mingle and ask questions directly to Alicia over a glass of wine. I think that's probably the nicest way to continue the conversation. Let me thank two people. First, Matthew, for organising so brilliantly. I'm sure everybody on Zoom has had a good experience as well. If not, we'll hear about it subsequently. Thank you so much for putting the event together, for the team that's supported you as well. It's difficult to put on hybrid events, and we were all gaining new skills through doing so. They're clapping. Very good. Excellent. So they seem to be happy. That's fantastic. Thank you, Matthew, seriously, for all of the hard work putting this event together and for your patience, given the number of times that we had to postpone it. But of course, a huge round of thanks to Alicia for a talk which has done everything that the publicity promised and more. I know there are others in the audience who are also on the Eastern Aegean Islands in 2015 and 2016, watching what was going on and talking to the migrants, the asylum seekers, the refugees, and astonished by the experience. What few of us, I think, had the sensitivity and the understanding to do is to empathize with this experience across the full history of written Greek time, from Homer, the Iliad, through to Aeschylus, the Supplices, and then into modern times, Elias Bernays' great Aeoliki. This extraordinary story that Alicia has pulled together, not artificially, but through the depth of her own experience of working with women refugees in Athens. I think it's been an experience for all of us to listen to this. Thank you so much, Apokardias, from my heart for doing this for us. It has been a real honor and a privilege. So a final round of thanks to you, Alicia. There is Glasgow wine outside, I promise. Thank you so much.